Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're looking at an everyday item so fundamentally basic you probably have it sitting right in your kitchen right now. But thousands of years ago, this remarkably simple invention completely changed the trajectory of human evolution. We're talking about a prehistoric breakthrough that literally built civilization from the ground up. It altered where we lived, how we traded, and honestly, even how our entire societies were structured. Okay, let's dive into this. Who actually invented the very first loaf of bread? Well, it's actually a massive historical mystery. Nobody knows the exact identity of the first prehistoric baker. There's just no single genius we can point to in the historical record. But we do know exactly where the story begins. And spoiler alert, it wasn't on a farm or in some bright modern bakery. It started with ancient humans simply foraging through wild grasses thousands of years before the first cultivated fields even existed. Just imagine being one of those early hunter-gatherers in a harsh, prehistoric landscape. You've spent all day painstakingly gathering these tiny wild seeds, using early stone tools, just dropping them into wooden baskets. But here's the major sensory problem they faced. Raw grains are incredibly hard to eat. Literally, picture yourself trying to chew on a whole mouthful of hard, dry, uncooked seeds. It's not exactly a comfortable experience, right? You could break a tooth. Plus, it's definitely not an efficient way for your body to extract calories. So they desperately needed a way to make this abundant golden food source actually edible. To solve this hard seed problem, our ancestors basically became early engineers. They experimented step by step. First, of course, they gathered the wild seeds. Second, someone figured out that if you crush those seeds between two heavy stones, they shatter and turn into fine flour. Third, they mixed that flour with clean water, which created this strange sticky dough. And finally, and this is the genius part, someone had the brilliant idea to place that thin dough onto a hot stone right next to the campfire. The result? The very first crispy, warm flatbread. I mean, talk about a total game changer for human survival. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast between what they made back then and what we eat today. On one hand, you have ancient flatbread. Thin, dense, cooked super quickly on hot stones. It was an amazing survival food, for sure, but it wasn't exactly a soft brioche bun, you know? Then, on the other hand, we have modern bread, which is thick, fluffy, and beautifully risen. So how in the world did humanity bridge the gap between a dense prehistoric cracker and the soft, fluffy loaves we love today? Well, there was a missing link just waiting to be discovered. And that answer is fermentation. That's the process where wild yeast actually feeds on sugars in the dough, producing these trapped bubbles of carbon dioxide gas. Let's just pause for a second and appreciate the sheer microscopic wonder of this. Wild yeast particles were already floating invisibly through the ancient air, literally all around these early campfires and settlements. And when the conditions were just right, those microscopic organisms landed right on the moist dough sitting in primitive clay bowls, setting off this quiet, completely invisible biological reaction. Seriously, try to put yourself in the shoes of a prehistoric baker seeing this happen for the very first time. They didn't have microscopes. They couldn't see the yeast cells consuming sugars and producing tiny pockets of gas. To them, the dough was literally mysteriously coming alive. They just saw a small lump of dough sitting in a bowl, expanding and doubling in size all by itself. It must have looked like pure invisible magic. But they quickly learned how to harness it, repeat it, and in doing so, they fundamentally changed the texture of human food forever. Section 2. Fueling ancient civilizations and how bread changed human behavior. So now we're going to zoom out from the microscopic science of the dough to the massive macro impact this invention had on human history. And to see this macro impact in full force, we have to travel forward in time a bit to the highly skilled master bakers of ancient Egypt. The absolute crucial point here is that bread wasn't just a basic snack for them. It was the absolute backbone of their entire society. Egyptian bakers became incredibly skilled, building these glowing mud brick clay ovens that allowed them to bake large quantities of beautiful golden crust loaves. Bread became a massive part of everyday life. It was traded constantly in bustling marketplaces all along the Nile. It even served as a literal unit of economic value. If you worked on a massive monument, your wages were often paid in food rations, specifically bread. The size and quality of your loaf directly represented your wealth and social status. And this brilliantly illustrates the rapid evolutionary arc of humanity as a whole. Think about it. We started in phase 1 as nomadic hunter-gatherers, right? Constantly on the move, tracking animals and seasonal plants. But the desire for bread completely changed us. Because to get enough grain, you can't just wander around. You have to plant it, tend to it, and stay in one place to harvest it.
This forced phase 2, becoming settled grain farmers. Then, those farms naturally grew into phase 3, structured villages with permanent homes. And eventually, those villages just exploded into phase 4, massive ancient cities. The simple act of growing grain literally rooted humanity to one single place.
But once humanity settled in these rapidly expanding cities, a brand new challenge emerged. How do you keep thousands of people fed year-round? Think about fresh fruit for a second. It's highly seasonal, and, well, before modern refrigeration, it rots and disappears really quickly. But stored grain, that's a different story. When dried and kept safely in huge protected facilities, grain lasts long-term. It meant that even in the dead of winter or during a really severe drought, a city had a stable food supply ready to be milled into flour and baked into bread. Because of its absolute vital importance to a city's survival, a pretty stark reality emerged. Controlling grain meant controlling power. Ancient rulers, kings, and pharaohs quickly realized that whoever held the keys to the massive grain warehouses held the loyalty and, honestly, the lives of the people. They started stationing heavily armed guards at these storehouses, strictly managing the distribution of rations. Bread was no longer just mere sustenance. It had basically become the ultimate source of political and societal control. Moving on to Section 3, the legacy of bread, from ancient stones to modern supermarkets. As ancient empires expanded through trade and conquest, so did the technology of baking. It spread from ancient Mediterranean maps straight to the bustling towns of medieval Europe and eventually landed right into the bright, modern bakeries and supermarket aisles we know today. But despite that epic, sprawling, literally thousands of years-long history, it all boils down to just 4 basic things. It's almost unbelievable when you think about it. An invention that built massive cities, powered entire empires, and fundamentally established human civilization requires only 4 simple elements to create. Let's look at how the past directly meets the present year. First up, you have flour, the foundation, which still comes from crushed seeds, exactly like it did millennia ago. Then you have water, which binds the flour into that familiar sticky dough. Add a pinch of salt to enhance the flavor of the loaf. And finally, yeast, that same invisible magic we talked about earlier that makes the bread rise. Whether you're a prehistoric human sitting by a smoky campfire, an Egyptian baker in a mud brick bakery, or a modern chef in a bright stainless steel kitchen, you are utilizing the exact same ancient technology. Which brings us to this really profound realization. Every single bite is a taste of ancient technology. Today, we can just walk into a supermarket, grab a sliced loaf off the shelf in a matter of minutes, and we barely even think about it. But that fluffy sandwich bread? It is the direct, unbroken descendant of a prehistoric hunter-gatherer, standing in a field at sunrise, looking at a handful of wild grasses in pure amazement, and deciding to just experiment. I want to leave you with a final, I think, fascinating question. If a handful of crushed seeds and some floating microscopic yeast could literally build massive civilizations, what other invisible magic from the ancient world are we still taking for granted today? The next time you make a sandwich or walk past a warm bakery, take a moment to appreciate the thousands of years of human ingenuity baked into every single slice. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep your curiosity alive, and I'll catch you next time.